For most of us, $1 billion is a far-fetched dream. We can't even imagine how much space this much money would take, let alone figure out how to accumulate such an insane amount of wealth. But clearly it's possible, as proven by several multi-billionaires out there. However, some of these billionaires got a little careless and lost everything they had and are now practically broke. Let's find out how these unfortunate people managed to lose all their money and assets. Number 10. Vijay Mallya. Vijay Mallya has accepted the face of poverty after his tumble from a billionaire tycoon status to the never-ending financial crisis. Mallya was born into a rich cradle, as he is the son of Vijay Mallya, who expanded his business operations to aviation, alcohol, and many other lines. Following in his father's footsteps, he started an incredible company. Mallya, once popular because of his extravagant lifestyle, mega parties, and over-the-top character, loved being in the spotlight. Guided by Mallya, the empire grew even bigger, acquiring more and more wealth. Mallya played the promiscuous spaces of business sectors, from alcohol to aeroplanes, evidencing his dream and flashy persona. Kingfisher Airlines, which began operations by making extravagant promises in India's airline industry, depicted luxury in the sphere of Indian aviation. Nevertheless, its high charges and galloping expansion made it incapable of becoming a sustainable model. Soon, it got caught in operation problems. With time, the financial problems increased, and thus, his rich business gradually disappeared. Despite receiving aid from various enterprises and even with the selling of assets, the situation remained troublesome. The bankruptcy of Kingfisher Airways in 2012 might be seen as a turning point in Mallya's career, but the actual downfall started with the bank. As of October 2013, Kingfisher Airlines had not paid its employees in 15 months and owed more than $1 billion in bank debts. By November 2015, the sum due to the banks had risen to at least $1.35 billion. As part of the Kingfisher collapse, Mallya is accused of being a willful defaulter under Indian law, including allegations of money laundering and theft. In March 2016, a court in Hyderabad issued a non-bailable warrant for Mallya's arrest. Hardship also gave rise to allegations by people. Many accused him of fraud and money laundering, marking the end of his golden era. Mallya's reputation started to crumble while the court battles intensified. Though he tried his best to handle his financial troubles, the authorities came after him with extradition processes, which he avoided by sneaking away to the UK. Number 9. Patricia Clug. Not long ago, Patricia Clug was ranked as one of the wealthiest women in America, having an extravagant and grandiose life. However, the bubble burst in the property market in 2008 that eventually made her lose every asset she had built over all those years. Clug was born into a wealthy family and inherited a good amount of money from her parents. In 1981, she married a very rich man named John W. Clug, and his multi-billion-dollar wealth became hers. However, their marriage ended in divorce 9 years later, and Clug received a settlement of around $1 million per annum, as well as the gorgeous mansion in Albemarle, Virginia. Along with her third husband, Bill Moses, Clug gave herself the task of turning their estate into a functioning entity. She was now planning to set up a winery. They founded the Altgeld Estate Winery and Vineyard, together with the aim of capitalizing on the reputation of Virginia wines. Initially, their business did look promising, with the praised wines served at the highest events, such as Chelsea Clinton's wedding. But soon, Clug's aspirations took the wrong turn. She acquired substantial loans to upgrade her winery and construct a state-of-the-art residential property called Vineyard Estates. The plan was great, but ended up crashing amid the housing bubble crisis, as housing prices fell and purchasers disappeared. Out of options, Clug liquidated everything that she could hold on to, like her jewelry, works of art, and furniture, which went to an auction. Nevertheless, she tried hard to meet her ascending debts, but in the end, she had to file for bankruptcy in 2011. Donald Trump, a good friend of the Clugs, wanted to buy their estate. However, reaching an agreement with the bank was very difficult. Clug then retreated to her small house while undergoing financial struggles. Despite the life-changing event, Clug was resilient and kind. Number 8. Sean Quinn. The riches-to-rags story of Sean Quinn has a thrilling beginning of a humble man who once achieved everything and then failed miserably. Quinn, who was once a famous Irish billionaire, watched his business crumble and dissolve in a sea of bad decisions and court battles. Quinn's business tactics allowed him to rise to the crest of Irish business leaders. He was a 25% shareholder of Anglo-Irish Bank at the top of his career, making him one of the country's wealthiest and most powerful men. Nonetheless, Quinn's situation went from bad to worse with the emergence of the 2008 global financial crisis. Anglo-Irish Bank, in which Quinn had a large stake, needed a rescue in order to avoid bankruptcy. Quinn realized he was caught in the spider's web of the bank's legal issues, apart from which the ballooning liability threatened the stability of his business. After a desperate attempt to hold on to his money, Quinn declared bankruptcy in 2011, stating that his financial value was way lesser than it used to be. This was the dramatic reversal of fortunes for a man who was once a respectful industrialist whose business was spread across multiple continents. Quinn's problems were further aggravated when allegations of contempt of court arose concerning his efforts to hide property holdings from the bank. Although he tried to evade responsibility, he got involved in a long and tedious legal battle that ruined his reputation. For Quinn, there were far-reaching ramifications that went beyond the courtroom. In one of the more hair-raising manifestations of hatred towards Quinn, as well as his business activities, Kevin Lunny, a personally close partner of Quinn, was kidnapped in 2019. This event marked the realization of the rage against Quinn and the remnants of his rule. While the early economic success provided Quinn with a high ground, his laziness in dealing with turbulent economic conditions proved fatal for him. Number 7. Joselyn Wildenstein. Joselyn Wildenstein, famously known as the Catwoman due to her extreme physical appearance, was a billionaire. She rose to fame owing to her rich lifestyle. Her story is an ideal example of mishandling money and misery. She entered a bankruptcy case on May 2018, admitting that the wealth she had possessed a while ago had faded away. Her previous riches did not reconcile with the fact that she got only $900 as Social Security checks on a monthly basis, and that she had to rely on the help of her friends and relatives for her bills. The fall of Wildenstein's fortune may be attributed to her divorce from the early 21st century billionaire art collector Alec Wildstein, who died in 1999. Despite her having been granted an unbelievable $2.5 billion in the divorce, she somehow lost most of it. She is convinced that the source of her financial problems lies in a defective trust that was concluded during the divorce and which was probably secured by expensive artworks. Nevertheless, after a short time, it was discovered that most of these artworks were forgeries, and as a consequence, she started to face financial misery. The extravagances of her social life led to her downfall. While she was married, it is speculated that she and her husband enjoyed quite a luxurious lifestyle. She owned the rarest and most expensive things, including a Chanel outfit worth $350,000 and $10 million worth of jewelry. Notwithstanding a portfolio of multi-million-dollar property, Wildenstein's total liabilities exceed her assets. She owed around $300,000 to different lawyers or law firms, and her flat was in the process of being foreclosed, which worsened the amount of her debt back in 2018. It is obvious that the private aspects of Wildenstein's life have been stormy. She and her intended lover, Lloyd Dan Klein, have also been on the receiving end of assault charges. Through all of those undermining issues, Wildenstein remained unflinching. She intended to initiate a lawsuit against her trust as part of a legal maneuver to obtain what she deserves. But the details of her legal course of action remain a mystery. Number 6. Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff's name is now associated with one of the most infamous financial scandals ever, as he executed the most sophisticated Ponzi scheme in U.S. history. Madoff, who was considered to be a one-of-a-kind financial figure, used his post as a cover to rob his investors of billions of dollars and left behind a trail of devastation. Madoff's plan was not caught for decades, thus making him the unparalleled leader of the largest Ponzi scheme in U.S. history. His investors suffered massive losses, estimated at $65 billion. The most insidious part about Madoff's fraud was its longevity and the trust he was able to amass up from his victims. The dismantling of Madoff's scheme started in 2008 when he was accused of 11 counts of fraud, money laundering, perjury, and theft. However, despite the reputation he had earned in the world of finance, Madoff was still apprehended by the authorities. He was sentenced to serve 150 years in a federal prison, which effectively cut short his career as a swindler and a fake banker. Before his conviction, Madoff and his wife enjoyed luxury, living with a personal net worth of $800 million. On the other hand, his unscrupulous dealings reached their limit, which led to the confiscation of the vast majority of his belongings. In the plea bargain with prosecutors, Madoff gave up about 90% of his assets. Ruth Madoff obtained an advantage of $2.5 million in the settlement and started a new life without any connection to his past crimes. Madoff's downfall shows that in the financial sector, there can be too much greed and cheating. His gullible investors trusted him with their life savings, only to find themselves at the receiving end of the ugliest deception. Madoff's fraudulent acts not only hurt individuals but also tarnished the credibility of Wall Street and the whole system of finance. However, Madoff applied for an early release from the federal prison in Butner, North Carolina, citing the threats of his kidney disease and the deadly coronavirus. Despite that, prosecutors were firm in their position that he should first serve his term for his crimes. His death in a prison cell in 2021 concluded one of history's most notorious criminal finance cases. The reverberating consequences of Madoff's fraud are still felt by victims who bear the harshest of the costs. The Madoff Victims Fund, chaired by attorney Richard Breeden, has dispensed billions of dollars to the victims whose lives were ruined by Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. Aubrey McClendon, once dubbed America's most reckless billionaire, was one of the country's largest landowners, holding more than 100,000 acres. He had stakes in various culinary businesses, mainly in Oklahoma, such as Irma's Burger Shack and Deep Fork Grill. He also boasted a personal wine collection of around 100,000 bottles of the most expensive and rare wines. After being indicted by a federal grand jury for breaching antitrust laws while serving as CEO of Chesapeake Energy from 2007 to 2012, he was discovered dead in a vehicle wreck that was ultimately ruled an accident. McClendon was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of conspiring to rig bids for the purchase of oil and natural gas leases in northwest Oklahoma. This led to speculations regarding his sudden demise. Many believed he was murdered, while Oklahoma City Police spokesman Paco Valderrama's statement hinted that Aubrey may have intentionally caused the accident. What do you think? Number 5. Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth Holmes, once a bright star in Silicon Valley, accumulated an incredible $5 billion in profit only to lose everything. Her blood testing company Theranos was valued at $9 billion. The company's valuation soared after it claimed to have revolutionized blood testing by developing methods that needed only very small volumes of blood, such as from a finger prick. However, in 2016, revelations of fraud about Theranos' claims began to surface. At first, Holmes was a teenage tech talent, and the Theranos brand was perceived as the harbinger of the new medical paradigm. In the early 2000s, the company raised a notable amount of $6 million. Nevertheless, an air of skepticism soon built up about Theranos' soaring heights, especially with the matters of compliance and regulations. In 2012, the FDA raised issues against the company, which led to investigations bringing to light the company's misrepresentation of its products. Even though the company got an FDA nod and a wave of media coverage for just a short time, there were signs that the facade was failing. By 2015, the most significant collaborations had fallen apart, which displayed that profound problems existed in the company. Regulators' attention focused on the possible risks to patients. In addition, legal disputes ensued, with a federal charge of massive fraud at its end. After Theranos' fall in 2018, she lost her control over the company and had to face criminal charges. Theranos' collapse was marked with accused wire fraud charges against both Holmes and her former colleague, Sunny Balwani. The situation of Elizabeth Holmes got worse after she was arrested, as the cases over reparation were moving right ahead. Holmes was entrusted to repay the swindled investors, and a $400 million debt hung by her neck. Nevertheless, her financial situation was truly shocking. Her trial began in August 2021, following a year-long delay due to the COVID-19 pandemic and Holmes's pregnancy. The United States Attorney for the Northern District of California prosecuted the case. Holmes testified in self-defense for 7 days, claiming, among other things, that her staff misled her about the technology and that her ex-romantic partner, Balwani, who was also on trial, wielded power over her during their romantic relationship, which was still ongoing when the alleged criminal acts occurred. The evidence presented in the court demonstrated Holmes' involvement in false demonstrations, fabricated validation reports, deceptive contract claims, and inflated financials at Theranos. On January 3, 2022, Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors. Later in November, U.S. District Judge Edward Davila sentenced Holmes to 11 years and 3 months in prison and ordered her to surrender by April 27, 2023. The sentence included a fine for each count of fraud and a 3-year supervised release after the prison term. She was also ordered to pay $452 million to the victims of the fraud. Elizabeth Holmes, who reached the epitome of her professional career and later was essentially struck off, is a typical example of the American dream becoming a nightmare. Number 4. Balur Goodmanson. Balur Goodmanson's story illustrates the sort of runaway fortune that sometimes happens in the world of billionaires. Goodmanson was known to be the second richest Icelandic person, earning his wealth through a successful brewery company and a football club, West Ham, he owned in the UK. Nevertheless, Landsbankie's collapse in 2008, which was one of the country's largest banks, was the moment that his empire burned to the ground. The results of the failure of Landsbankie for Goodmanson were particularly bad. The worst-case scenario was when he had to file for bankruptcy, as he owed a $700 million debt, partly making it the largest bankruptcy filing in Icelandic history. It only took Forbes 2 years to see his net worth fall from $1 billion to an insignificant zero, clearly demonstrating the total failure of his once thriving financial empire. The major factor that led to the decline of Goodmanson was the extremely unstable economic situation of that period. The 2008 global financial crisis had a devastating impact on Iceland's economy. It aggravated the problems of the country's biggest financial institutions. Goodmanson and his son Thor together accumulated a huge share in Landsbanki, which shows how much their losses affected their personal wealth. In spite of the hardships Goodmanson experienced, his son and heir Thor pointed to the possibilities of redemption. The Billions to Bustin' Back autobiography by Thor deals with his roller coaster journey from riches to rags and then picking up like a phoenix from the ashes. Thor is a big example of how luck fluctuates. Being smart, having consistent investments, and at the same time having an attitude of never giving up brought him back to billionaire status. Number 3. Donald Trump. Despite the fact President Trump has neither personally declared bankruptcy nor liquidated, some of his business assets have gone bankrupt. Taj Mahal Casino, owned by him in Atlantic City, has already collapsed with 2 other casinos, and the Plaza Hotel in New York City has been forced to file bankruptcy. In spite of all these failings, it is not a particular concern for Trump. However, the failures of Trump's financial obligations keep recurring, and his lawyers have also exposed that they are facing serious troubles. They are borrowing a sum of about $400 million to put on hold a particular verdict of a judge that was made in New York during a civil fraud case. Moreover, the judge forced him to deposit a $91 million bond in several other cases where the accuser sued him for abuse. Krugman, a reputed financial expert, gloomily foretells that Donald Trump will become poorer in the coming years. Trump's wealth had been generated from his real estate assets. He owns an apartment building worth approximately $500 million in New York. He additionally has around $600 million in liquidated funds, and the Miami resort he owns is worth an estimated $300 million. On the contrary, not all of Trump's businesses are doing great. Due to the distancing rules during the COVID-19, his office buildings were affected proportionally. Also, Trump's social media business, Truth Social, didn't obtain the audience they desired as a tariff. It only had 6.5 million users by the end of 2023. Nonetheless, Trump can push ahead despite the obstacles he faces now. If regulatory agencies give the merger a green light between his company and the social media partner, his net worth may increase by a stunning $4 billion in the stock market. Therefore, either way, Donald Trump plans to return to his initial state of economic stability. Donald Trump's move through the money market demonstrates that the process of fortune cultivation is uncontrollable. He had run his enterprises to the ground, but it did not crush him. Number 2. Batista. Batista, who was the richest man in Brazil, once aimed to become the richest person on the planet. His massive oil company, OGX, caused his wealth to grow at an alarming rate. By 2012, he had a net worth of $30 billion. Originally, his wealth was far greater when the government declared OGX bankrupt in 2013, owing to the country's economic crisis. Through the avenues of his lavish lifestyle and multifaceted achievements, he became the hero of prosperity and a role model for many Brazilians. He was the 6th richest person in the world when he was at the top of his career, which shows that he had both the skills and ambition of an entrepreneur. On the other hand, the collapse of his business revealed the fragility of his immense capital. Batista's concern intensified as he had to deal not only with financial troubles, but also with legal issues. In 2018, he was condemned to be in prison for 30 years on charges of bribery related to the former governor of Rio de Janeiro, Sergio Cabral. However, the legal drama was a turning point in his reputation and contributed to the ongoing decline of the once well-known businessman. Number 1. Alan Stanford. Alan Stanford underwent a radical change when he was convicted of operating one of the biggest Ponzi schemes humanity has ever seen. It resulted in robbing thousands of investors, with the total sum of losses amounting to $7 billion. Imagine how anticlimactic was Stanford's popularity. His downfall can only be paralleled with it. Stanford's net worth at the peak of his career was considered to be $2 billion, and this enabled him to become a prominent figure in the entertainment industry. The hasty display of his wealth appeared in his aircraft rentals and expensive royal gifts. On one hand, the facade of prosperity hid a dark, intricate knot of lies and investment fraud. The well-known Stanford Financial Group, which was presented as a stable and solid setup, turned out to have been just a cover for an extensive funding scheme. The investors were told that their money was invested in safe assets, but it was actually used to sponsor some dubious businesses, to which he channeled all the funds. This controversy ranged from prison violence to drug problems, and the trials constantly failed due to postponements and disruptions. Finding ways to disown the responsibility and portray himself as a victim of situations was not enough for Stanford, as he was finally convicted on 13 counts of fraud. Stanford, now in jail, only has his life to live as his fortune is all gone. Thank you for watching the video. Stay tuned for more exciting ones.